The desert highway stretched endlessly under the fading light of dusk. Sarah Martinez sat on the dusty shoulder of the road, her 3-year-old son Tommy nestled against her chest. Her ripped jeans bore witness to her recent fall, and her worn tank top offered little protection against the evening chill beginning to settle over the Arizona landscape. She pulled Tommy closer, feeling his small body trembling. Whether from cold or fear, she couldn't tell anymore. It had been 2 hours since Marcusa, Tommy's father, had shoved them out of the truck. 2 hours since he'd screamed at her one final time, calling her worthless, telling her she'd ruined his life. 2 hours since she'd watched the taillights of what used to be their vehicle disappear down this lonely stretch of highway. Sarah wasn't crying anymore. She'd run out of tears somewhere between the second passing car that hadn't stopped and the realization that her phone had died an hour ago. Now she just sat, holding her son, watching the pink and orange sky slowly fade to purple. "Mama," Tommy whispered, his voice small and uncertain. "Are we going home soon?" Sarah's heart broke a little more. "Yes, baby," she lied softly, stroking his curly brown hair. Soon. She didn't know where home was anymore. The apartment they'd shared with Marcus was his name only. Her family, well, her mother had made it clear years ago that bringing a baby into the world without a ring on her finger was unforgivable. Her father had simply stopped taking her calls. At 27 years old, Sarah had learned that the world could be a very cold place. Another vehicle approached. Sarah had stopped looking up, stopped hoping, but this one slowed down. Then it stopped. She glanced up cautiously. A white GMC truck had pulled onto the shoulder about 20 feet ahead. The driver's door opened, and a man stepped out. He was tall, maybe in his early 40s, wearing a navy blue suit that looked expensive even from this distance. His dark hair was neatly styled, and as he walked toward them, Sarah noticed the concern etched on his face. "Ma'am." His voice was gentle, careful. "Are you all right?" Sarah instinctively pulled Tommy closer. 5 years with Marcus had taught her to be wary of men, especially ones who seemed too put together, too confident. "We're fine," she said, hearing the tremor in her own voice betray the lie. The man stopped a respectful distance away. He looked at her torn clothes, at the small child in her arms, at the bruise she knew was forming on her cheekbone. His expression shifted from concern to something deeper, understanding, perhaps, or recognition of suffering he'd seen before. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, slowly, deliberately, he removed his suit jacket. "It's getting cold," he said simply, extending it toward her. "Please." Sarah stared at the jacket. It was the kind of gesture she'd read about in books, seen in old movies her grandmother used to watch. But people didn't actually do things like this, did they? Not for strangers sitting on the side of a desert highway. I can't," she stammered. "You can," he replied, his tone firm but kind. "And you will, for him, if not for yourself." He nodded toward Tommy, whose wide eyes were watching the stranger with a mixture of curiosity and caution. Something in those words of the acknowledgement that she would do anything for her son made Sarah's defenses crumble. She reached out with one shaking hand and accepted the jacket. It was still warm from his body heat, and impossibly soft. "Thank you," she whispered. The man nodded. "My name is Daniel Richardson, and before you say anything else, I want you to know that I'm not going to hurt you or your son. But I am going to help you, if you'll let me." Sarah wrapped the jacket around Tommy first, then herself. "I'm Sarah. This is Tommy." "Hello, Tommy," Daniel said, crouching down to the boy's level but maintaining his distance. "That's a nice Winnie the Pooh shirt you've got there." Tommy smiled slightly, the first smile Sarah had seen on his face in hours. "Pooh Bear is my favorite." "Mine too, when I was your age," Daniel replied. Then he looked back at Sarah. "I own a construction company. We have offices about 30 miles up the road. There's a family services center right next to it. Good people who can help with housing, resources, Whatever you need, will you let me drive you there? Every instinct Sarah had developed over the past 5 years screamed at her not to trust him, but something else, yes, something deeper, something that remembered the girl she'd been before, Marcusa, whispered that this man was different. Why? She asked, her voice barely audible. Why would you help us? Daniel was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of old pain. 20 years ago, my sister was in a situation similar to yours. She sat on a roadside in Colorado with my nephew, after her husband. Well, after he decided she wasn't worth keeping around, a stranger stopped and helped her, got her to a shelter, helped her find a job, changed her whole life. He stood up slowly. She always told me that if I ever had the chance to be that stranger for someone else, I should take it, so I'm taking it. No strings attached, no expectations, just one person helping another. Sarah looked into his eyes and saw only truth there. Okay, she said softly. The drive to Daniel's office took 40 minutes. He kept the truck warm, played soft music on the radio, and didn't push her to talk. Tommy fell asleep in Sarah's arms, finally peaceful. When they arrived, Daniel made several phone calls. Within an hour, a kind woman named Patricia from the Family Services Center had arrived. She had warm smiles, gentle hands, and a wealth of information about temporary housing, job training programs, and legal assistance. But Daniel didn't leave. He stayed through all of it, making sure Sarah and Tommy had everything they needed. He arranged for them to stay at a clean, safe motel for a week while Patricia worked on finding them more permanent housing. He made sure they had food, clothes for Tommy, and medical care for Sarah's bruises. Why are you doing all this? Sarah asked him that night, standing outside the motel room while Tommy slept inside. Daniel was quiet for a moment, looking up at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. My sister's name was Jennifer. Past tense. She passed away 3 years ago. Cancer. I'm so sorry, Sarah whispered. She lived a good life after that stranger helped her. Daniel continued. Raised my nephew to be a fine young man. Went to college. Became a teacher. Found love again with a man who treated her the way she deserved to be treated. He looked at Sarah. But none of that would have happened if someone hadn't stopped on that roadside, if someone hadn't seen her as worthy of help. You think I'm worthy? Sarah asked, the question catching in her throat. I think every person who's trying to protect their child, who's surviving despite everything trying to break them, who's still standing even when the world has knocked them down, I think they're worthy of every kindness we can offer. Daniel's voice was firm. You're stronger than you know, Sarah. I can see it, and one day, you'll believe it too. The week at the motel stretched into a month as Patricia helped Sarah navigate the complex systems of assistance programs and job placement. Daniel checked in regularly, not intrusively, but enough to make sure Sarah and Tommy were safe and cared for. He offered Sarah a job in his company's office, administrative work, he said, nothing demanding at first, just something to help her get back on her feet. I don't have much experience, Sarah admitted. You're a mother who kept her child safe under impossible circumstances, Daniel replied. You're organized enough to survive on nothing. You're resourceful. You're determined. That's all the experience I need to see. Sarah took the job. She worked hard, harder than she'd ever worked at anything. She proved Daniel's faith in her wasn't misplaced. Tommy started at a nearby preschool that Patricia had recommended. He began to smile more, laugh more, be the joyful little boy he was meant to be. Months passed. Sarah saved money, found a small apartment. She made friends with other women at work, women who didn't judge her past but celebrated her present. She started taking night classes at the community college, thinking about maybe becoming a teacher herself one day. Daniel remained a constant, quiet presence in their lives, not as anything more than a friend and mentor, but as someone who had fundamentally altered the trajectory of their existence through one simple act of kindness. One evening, nearly a year after that night on the highway, Sarah sat in her small but clean apartment, Watching Tommy play with his toys, she thought about how different her life looked now, how different she felt. She thought about the jacket Daniel had offered her that night as she'd returned it long ago, cleaned and pressed, and how such a small gesture had meant everything. And she understood, finally, what Daniel had been trying to tell her all along. That kindness isn't about grand gestures or changing someone's entire life in an instant. It's about seeing another person's humanity, acknowledging their worth, and offering whatever you can in that moment. Sometimes that's a jacket, sometimes it's a ride, sometimes it's a job or a kind word or just a recognition that someone is worthy of being helped. Sarah made a promise to herself that night. She would be that person for someone else someday. She would see someone struggling and offer whatever she could. She would remember that every person deserves kindness, especially when the world has forgotten to be kind to them. Because that's how change happens. So one jacket, one stranger, one moment of compassion at a time. Tommy looked up at her and smiled. "Mama, are you happy?" Sarah pulled him into her arms and kissed the top of his head. For the first time in years, she answered with complete honesty, "Yes, baby, I really am." Outside, the Arizona sun was setting in brilliant shades of pink and orange, painting the sky with the same colors that had witnessed her lowest moment. But now, those colors meant something different. They meant hope. They meant new beginnings. They meant that sometimes, when everything seems darkest, a stranger stops their truck and offers their jacket. And sometimes, that changes everything.